Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in for another episode of Education Insights. This is Dr. Daria Lorio Barston, and I wanted to personally thank you for joining us today. Also, if you find this as a useful way to engage in professional development, if this is something that is helpful information and you can think of other folks who might benefit from it as well, please feel free to share the episode with others, like, comment, engage with us in any way. We'd love to hear from you all. And also, small personal favor, if there are additional topics that you would love to hear us discuss, if there are additional things that you really want to bring to the top of our conversations, please let us know. Send us an email at cebis, that's CEBIS, at odu.edu, and we will happily gab about your topic of choice. Thanks so much. Enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Education Insights Focus on Behavior podcast. We're here to talk about all things behavior in the world of education. We take the science of behavior and break it down for educators into easily implementable steps, and we're excited to spend some time with you. Get ready to talk through behavior, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can all improve our work in schools so we as educators can be more fulfilled and our students can be more successful.
Welcome back to our newest episode of Education Insights Focus on Behavior. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I am joined by my co-host, Daniel Irwin. Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
And Dr. Daria Lorio Barston. Hi, Daria.
Hi, everyone.
And as always, we're happy to have our producer, Emily Muse. Hi, Emily.
Hello there.
All right. So if you joined us last week, we just recently released an episode on social skills and how they're part of the educational experience, but that teachers may not feel super prepared to always provide instruction on social emotional learning. But I think we can all agree that when students don't have strong skills in this area, it can be difficult for them. So today, we're going to deviate a little bit from our typical format, and we're going to really just continue our conversation, but we're going to shift our focus to secondary students. So as students get older and start to prepare for their transition out of school, social skills really become even more important.
They do. And, it's because, the same with anything, with reading, with math, with any other sort of core content, skills build upon each other, right? And a well-designed curriculum across any of those domains ushers people through, teaches the skills you need to be successful, to meet those sort of end of year goals, and then have all the skills you need when you leave high school. When it comes to things like social skills, one, many times there's not sort of this pre-K through 12th grade curriculum with which to base all your instruction, right? And most kids develop a lot of these skills independently through trial and error, right? Like middle school can be tough. And it's partially because everyone's trying to figure out socially where they belong and who they are and all of those things. And when we start thinking about what happens when kids leave high school, employers tell us that some of these like social skills like integrity and communication and teamwork, those kinds of things are skills that they look for a lot of times over some of like the actual job skills. It's those soft skills that can make or break you in the workplace or in college. Basically, as your world starts to expand, having those skills will help you be successful as you generalize into new environments with new people, and being able to adapt can create or prevent success in whatever that is. And so really thinking about how to identify where those barriers are, if they're important to a student moving into post-secondary life, whether it's independent living or leisure or the workplace or college or whatever it is they're going into, and making sure that they can demonstrate the skills, understand when the skills are needed, can have a huge impact on their life, well outside of sort of how they did in calculus.
Yeah, Daniel, I agree. And I think it's important to also consider that when the students do get outside of the school's doors, right, when they are becoming and take on full-on adulting, I think we have to remember that they face a lot more, maybe not a lot more, but more natural consequences in some of those places outside of the school. And so I think it's important to build those social skills while we're still able to provide a lot of explicit instruction, while we are able to provide a lot of supports and then fade them to get them ready to a place where not everybody is going to be kind and patient, and not everybody is going to have an adult close by to say, we solve conflicts with our words, not with our hands, right? So I think it's a consideration to prepare them to have a good quality of life, but also to prepare them to um, to have the kind of quality of life that they want, socially speaking.
Yeah, and what I think is really difficult about as students get older and social skills in particular is that the context around social skills changes, right? The right social skill to use or the right behavior to demonstrate in a particular context is going to change based on who's there, where are you, who are these people? You act very differently in front of your boss or your teacher than you do in front of your friends. And so making those decisions can be challenging. And like I said, as we get older, I think that context becomes more I think it's just more, there's just more context ultimately, right? There's more to consider. And then what you do that's right or wrong changes quite a bit based on all of those factors.
And I think that's such a good point. Going back to kind of what Daria said about like the world, right? The consequences are different and in some ways can be really severe. And social skills could set you up to receive severe consequences due to a lack of understanding. The other thing I liked is like while we have them, like we've got a captive audience. We've got kids in school, and so that idea of being able to apply relatively, I mean, a lot of times pretty complex skills in a variety of different environments, like the workplace, friendship relationships, your family, all these things takes a lot of rehearsal and practice and feedback over and over and over again so that when the time comes to actually do it, none of it's ever clean. It's never like this perfect example like you'd read in a social story. It's decision making after decision making over and over again based on real time, subtle, sometimes feedback. And so the more practice we can give kids in identifying where some of those deficits might be, the better off they're going to be when those wonky, tricky, complex situations arise that they've got a process to sort of power through or find help if they need it, all kinds of different things, but being fluent with the skills or the process of decision making can be really critical.
And it's both, right, Daniel? It's your ability to navigate your own social skills and how you interacting with others, but it's also your ability to read other people and choose the appropriate behavior in that context. So to Selena's point about how context becomes really important, I think particularly for our secondary students, the skill of code switching is really, really important for neurotypical, neurodiverse individual. I think this is the time that they're learning to kind of come into their own and figure out who they are. And sometimes there's a whole lot of behavioral errors, right? I think about when our students start experimenting with humor or particularly with sarcasm. And I think about the middle school students who don't always have the skill mastered of the way I talk to my friend. If I talk the same way to my teacher, I'm likely to get written up in a heartbeat, right? And so I think we have to be mindful to help our students learn the context and what are the decision rules for each one, both in terms of what they are doing and how they also interpret the situation as well, as far as the social situation goes.
So as students get older, how do we decide which social skills are important to teach?
I think you got to start with the students' spin, right? Like what are their strengths and preferences and interests and needs, and really think about that post-secondary planning broadly, right? Like what job skills are we seeing? What job skills are we not seeing? And sort of work from that core kind of understanding of these are the things kids need when they graduate into if this person wants to work in an office setting, how do we teach them then what those interactions are going to look like? Or if they're interested in pursuing romantic relationships following school, how do we teach them about consent and safety and communication? If they, getting from them and sort of understanding where goals are and then being able to tailor fit where instruction needs to happen to keep them both safe and successful uh, in whatever that is.
And that goes for higher ed too. As our students are entering college, there's a whole new world of social skills that they're going to have to learn because they're not going to necessarily be with their family, if they're living in a dorm, navigating roommates. I mean, there's a lot that I didn't receive direct instruction about before I moved into my freshman dorm that, you got to wear shower shoes and you got to like how do you take turns in different shared spaces? Like these are big things, but if no one tells you, and especially if you do struggle with observing other people as a way to learn social skills, which many of our students with disabilities do have that struggle, that can be challenging for sure.
I think we also have to look at the patterns and we have to look at the data to see where might be some of those behavioral errors that occur time and time again, right? So I think it's both. It's looking at the context where they are hoping to get to, it's looking at what skills do they need to have, but it's also looking at, and I know we don't always love to consider the weaknesses, right, or room for growth. But I think here it's really important to be able to pay attention to those things, because then we can jump in and provide some remediation and some actual instruction around the skills that the students have missed, whether it is because they haven't picked them up on social cues before, or whether it is because this is a new context. But I think about all the ways that we sometimes confuse our students, right? Where in elementary school, everybody generally, well, not everybody, but most people are generally pretty open to hugs. One of my favorite things about going into an elementary school is when I'm walking down the hallway and lots of strangers to me will come up and hug me just to tell me to have a good day. And I love that about elementary school. And that is not the case for everybody. Listeners, you did not see, but I will narrate for you that Selena was shaking her head that no, not everybody loves this, but a lot of people do. And I think a lot of times our students are used to potentially hugging their teachers, hugging their friends, and then they move to a secondary setting, and all of a sudden the rules are very different. And nobody might have told them that before in preparation, right? So I think a lot of our practices we also need to examine through the lens of what will this behavior or what will this lesson look like when the student is 12, 18, 22.
I think that hug example is such a good indicator, right? And I think, and this is just kind of my experience, a lot of that is allowed to linger on through middle school, high school, specifically for students with disabilities. Um, because it is a show of affection and teachers do love their students. And this is a great way at this moment to reinforce and to strengthen relationships and keep kids happy, right? Like, awesome. At the same time, when we set those high expectations of living independently and getting along with coworkers and developing strong adult safe relationships, we have to start sort of taking a step back and saying, is this something I would do or I'd want to see in the workforce, in the whatever? And is it going to get them where they need to be? Yes, right now we're happy, we're good. But I think Emily said, if I don't do something about this, what are the consequences later, right? It's like somebody's got to kind of step in and figure out how we can shape this in a way that will make it appropriate for work in ways that they are developing new skills to interact and gain that happiness without some of the things that may or may not be welcome to the other people around them.
So where do we go from here? Like what do teachers need to consider as they're planning? I mean, most teachers don't come in and say, I'm teaching social skills today. Most teachers say, I'm teaching 10th grade English or calculus or earth science or whatever the case may be. So how do teachers kind of reframe to consider this within their daily plans?
I don't think it's either or, right? I don't think it's I'm either teaching social skills or I'm teaching English or physics. I think it very much can be both as long as teachers are mindful of it and are planning for it. And I mean this class wide, and I also mean this on individual supports. I think when we have our students who have specific goals in their IEPs about social skill instruction, I think you have to make time. I think for everybody else in the whole class, I mean, let's be honest. We have a lot of our students who are in second year who are typically developing kiddos who do not have the social skills that they used to have pre-pandemic, pre-social media. You choose what you want to attribute this to, but there are studies that are very clearly demonstrating that the social skills are delayed for many students in secondary. And so I think it falls on all the teachers to figure out what are the natural opportunities to embed some of that social, emotional, and social skills instruction into the lesson. Can you open up the lesson with whatever your bell ringer is? Can you slide in some social skills instruction then? When you're asking students to work in groups, what a lovely natural opportunity to provide some explicit instruction about this is how we work in groups. Can we give students sentence stems if they are struggling with a way to engage in a conflict at that cognitive level without, starting talking about each other as a person, right? I think looking for those natural opportunities that already exist in asking students to interact with one another are great times for teachers to weave in some of those things. And I think the other really important piece is to make some of that thinking more visible for students about how do we as adults, how do we model, how do we think about the social situation, how do we make it, again, think alouds, and sharing some of our perspectives and modeling some of those behaviors is a really powerful instructional strategy as well.
But that explicit instruction is really important. A lot of times, what I see in classrooms is kind of this model and hope framework, right? We're going to model good social skills and we just hope that our students pick them up because we have all these other things we have to accomplish. I understand why this is challenging for sure, but explicit instruction really is required for all students. Many students will eventually pick things up, but a lot of times that doesn't happen for everybody. And even if it doesn't happen, even if it does happen for some students, we still need to plan to provide that explicit instruction at times.
And I think some of that, I think when we say explicit instruction, we always think of, well, maybe I always think of I do, we do, you do, right? But I also think about some of that explicit instruction of the I do part of using those of sentences where you're talking about the behavior and directly connecting it to the impact. When somebody does this, the impact that it has on the classroom is this. When you argue with a peer and you are critiquing their personality and not their idea, it is detrimental to our learning community, right? It does not make people want to talk more to you, right? Those kind of things. I think it's naming some of those behaviors and talking about how does that affect the classroom environment and other students and the student themselves is also a really powerful tool that again can be done regardless of the content, regardless of the time of the lesson, but those are really important opportunities to catch and name and use as a learning opportunity, not as a public shaming, but as a learning opportunity.
Yeah, I think finding that motivation and kind of coming back to that individual, like, here's your goals, right? How are we tying maybe the skill deficit right now to how I think how it's impacting things as they're happening now? How does it also impact, you moving forward or how people are going to interact with you moving forward. And then being able to kind of take it back and develop, based on the student, based on the context they're moving into, like how do you simplify the behaviors you want that they need to display in order to be successful and breaking it down and task analyzing that a little bit to say when someone gives you feedback, for instance, that you don't agree with or you don't like, what do you do with that? Well, you listen, you nod, and then what? Like the answer is not to generally start arguing back or list 15 points of why this person's wrong, right? Like that social skill is there's that self-management, there's the self-awareness, there's some processing there that has to happen in order to help them be successful and follow up in a way that's appropriate. We can't, right? Or someone doesn't want to talk to you when things go wrong and you're processing it. So this is that practice, but it's also sort of that what are the key component parts of any social skill that are really important? And then what does that look like for that person, right? And getting some buy-in of, well, if you are feeling a bit steamed, what are your strategies? We got strategies here at school to help you, right? Like you can take a walk, get water, ask for a break, whatever it is. What does that look like in the workforce? What does that look like if that's not an option at the moment, right? So it's a lot of planning, it's a lot of practice, but I think simplifying and step by step with rehearsal feedback in a place that's safe can be really powerful.
Yeah, and providing examples and non-examples, right? This is what you can do, this is what you should not do, right? I think also it gets really complex because we also have to teach our students, to Daniel's example about feedback, we also have to teach them when and how you respond to unsolicited feedback, that perhaps the source coming from that feedback is not one that you were really seeking, right? I think about that just because somebody says something to you or something about you does not mean that you need to take in that story and internalize and believe it. It's the whole idea of consider the source, right? And consider the context. And I think this is where it gets really complicated for many of our students when they have to figure out that the decision rules are likely to look very differently under different contexts. So if your boss is giving you feedback, that's one thing. If you are driving the car and you have accidentally cut somebody off and somebody is giving you some gestural feedback, perhaps that's not one that you need to respond to. Those kind of things I think are also really important for us to consider when we are providing the lessons around social skills.
All right. Well, I think that this has been a pretty good conversation about social skills, particularly at that secondary level where we may not think about some of these skills quite as frequently as we do at the elementary level. But they are critically important and probably even more important as kids get older. So with that, we're going to move into our unpaid ad for this episode. And Daniel, I think you have our resource today.
I do. The Center for Transitions Innovation, or the Center on Transition Innovations, has put out a toolkit called the Workplace Readiness Toolkit, Practicing Employment Skills at Home. And the toolkit is effectively, I think it could work for anybody to sort of think about what workplace readiness skills look like. Um, it's sort of marketed out as something to share with families. We mentioned how important it is to practice these skills in multiple environments with multiple people, right? Because that's how we use social skills. Um, but Virginia has identified 21 workplace readiness skills that employers are looking for with new employees, right? And it's basically the resource is designed to promote the activities that can reinforce, like give those opportunities for students to practice and get reinforced by embedding some of those skills at home. So these are like personal qualities and people skills and professional traits that, um, like I said, employers in Virginia have identified as being really key skills for people to have. So things like communication, teamwork, working with integrity and problem solving, demonstrating work ethic and initiative are all outlined in this. And they give you sort of some activities and and tools to use when teaching it, and then helping parents kind of understand, okay, this is what we're looking for and um, how we can work on it at home in other environments, right? Um, and that's that. And I think Emily will include the link in the notes, but it's got some really good activities that look at, I mean, things like creativity, right? Just things we might not think about all the time, but like, how do we help kids demonstrate work ethic? What does that look like? Um, and why is it important?
Great. Well, I think this brings us to the end of our episode. For our listeners, we really appreciate you and appreciate your time. Daria, Daniel, thank you for your contributions today.
Thank you, Selena.
Thanks for having us.
And Emily, thank you for keeping us on track.
Of course.
And we will see our listeners on our next episode.
Thanks for listening to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can join the conversation by emailing us at cbis@odu.edu, visiting www.cbisva.org, or following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky at CBISVA. Special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for their support of this project.